The alarm screamed through the corridors of Research Station. Alpha 7, as another team member died, Dr. Zex3 watched the medical readings flatline on his screen and felt his 4 hearts sink deeper into despair. That made 17 dead. Researchers in just 2 months, and they were no closer to understanding the creature that killed them, the thing they called. Subject Omega sat in its reinforced containment chamber like a beautiful nightmare. It looked like a mountain of living crystal, constantly shifting and changing colors from deep blue to brilliant white to angry red. Sometimes it pulsed with light from within, and other times it seemed to absorb all the light around it. The scientists had never seen anything like it before. Subject Omega had appeared on the mining colony of Kepler 442b without warning. The miners were deep in the planet's crust when they broke through into a vast underground chamber. Inside, they found the creature surrounded by strange crystal formations that looked almost like buildings or monuments. The moment the miners entered, Subject Omega had attacked, killing 12 of them instantly with bolts of pure energy. The Galactic Research Consortium had moved quickly to contain the situation. They built the research station around the creature's location and transported it to the most secure facility they had, but every attempt to study it ended in death. The creature seemed to hate all contact with other life forms. Dr. Zex3 was running out of options and time. His superiors wanted results, and the families of the dead researchers wanted answers. The creature was clearly intelligent, but it refused all attempts at communication. Every species in the consortium had tried their best translators and diplomats. The Veltari had used their telepathic abilities, the Kron had attempted mathematical sequences, and the Zephyrians had tried harmonic frequencies. Nothing worked. Perhaps we should consider termination, suggested Dr. Kellen, his Veltari assistant. Her mental tentacles twitched nervously as she spoke. The creature is too dangerous to study safely. Zex3 shook his head. The energy readings suggest this being is incredibly advanced. If we can understand its technology, it could revolutionize everything we know about power generation and energy manipulation. We cannot simply destroy it. Then what do you suggest? Kellen asked. We have tried every protocol in the consortium handbook. Our best minds have failed to make any progress. Zex3 pulled up the personnel files on his screen and scrolled through the remaining options. Most of the qualified xenobiologists were too frightened to work with Subject Omega after what happened to their colleagues. The few brave enough to try had already been killed or seriously injured. His eyes stopped on one file that made him pause. Jake Martinez, human, age 32, xenobiology specialist with the Earth Research Division. His record was impressive but also concerning. Martinez had a reputation for ignoring standard protocols and taking dangerous risks. He had successfully made contact with several previously hostile species, but his methods were considered reckless by consortium standards. What about the human? Zex3 asked, highlighting Martinez's file. Kellen's mental tentacles curled in disgust. Humans are unpredictable and emotional. They make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. Assigning a human to this task would be madness. Perhaps madness is exactly what we need, Zex3 replied. Our logical approaches have failed. Completely. Maybe an emotional and unpredictable approach will succeed where logic has not. The debate continued for several hours, with most of the research team opposing the idea of involving a human. Humans were relatively new to the Galactic Consortium, having joined only 50 years earlier. Most species still viewed them as primitive and dangerous, though they had proven surprisingly effective in certain diplomatic situations. Finally, Zex3 made his decision. He opened a communication channel to the human section of the station and requested Jake Martinez report to his office immediately. Jake arrived within minutes, looking exactly like what the other species expected from a human. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and curious brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He wore the standard research uniform, but somehow made it look casual and relaxed. You wanted to see me, Dr. Zex3? Jake asked, settling into the chair across from the alien scientist's desk. Yes, Mr. Martinez, I have a proposition for you, though I must warn you it is extremely dangerous. Zexthury pulled up the files on Subject Omega and displayed them on the wall screen. We need someone to observe this creature and attempt communication. 17 researchers have died trying. Jake studied the images and data readings with intense concentration. His eyebrows raised slightly when he saw the energy output measurements, but he showed no sign of fear or hesitation. What makes you think I can succeed where others have failed? Jake asked. Honestly, I do not know if you can, Zexthury admitted. But our standard approaches have proven completely ineffective. Your species has a reputation for unconventional solutions to impossible problems. And if I die like the others, then we will have learned that even human unpredictability cannot solve this puzzle. Jake was quiet for several minutes, reading through the research files and casualty reports. The creature had killed members of 4 different species each time, with devastating energy attacks. The victims had been vaporized so quickly they probably never felt pain. What exactly do you want me to do? Jake finally asked. Simply observe and attempt communication. We have built the most advanced containment system possible, with multiple backup power sources and emergency protocols. You will be as safe as we can make you. But 17 people have died despite all those safety measures. Yes, Zexthury acknowledged. I cannot guarantee your safety. I can only tell you that this creature may be the key to understanding energy manipulation technology. That could benefit the entire galaxy. Jake stood up and walked to the window that looked down into the containment chamber. Subject Omega was there, a massive crystalline form that pulsed with inner light. Even from this distance, and through multiple layers of protective shielding, Jake could feel the power radiating from the creature. When do I start? He asked. Dr. Kellen made a sound that might have been a gasp or a curse in her native language. You cannot be serious about accepting this assignment. I am completely serious, Jake replied, still watching the creature below. This being is obviously intelligent and powerful. If it wanted to simply kill everything around it, it could probably break out of that containment system any time it wanted. The fact that it stays contained suggests it wants something from us. It wants to kill us, Kellen stated flatly. Maybe, Jake said, or maybe it wants to talk and just doesn't know how. There's only one way to find out. Jake stood at the observation deck looking down at Subject Omega for the first time without protective barriers between them. The containment chamber was massive, easily the size of a football field, with walls made of reinforced transparent aluminum. Energy shields hummed constantly, creating a faint blue glow around the creature. The being was even more impressive up close. It rose nearly 20 feet high, its crystalline body constantly shifting and changing like a living mountain of gems. Waves of color flowed across its surface in patterns that seemed almost like breathing. Sometimes it would pulse bright white. Other times it would dim to deep purple or brilliant gold. Dr. Zexthury stood behind Jake with several other researchers, all of them maintaining a respectful distance from the observation window. They had seen too many colleagues die to take any chances. The remote monitoring equipment is positioned around the chamber, Zexthury explained. You can observe from here through the cameras and sensors. There's no need to go any closer. Jake nodded but continued watching the creature directly. Something about the way it moved caught his attention. The energy patterns were not random like they had first thought. There was a rhythm to them, almost like a heartbeat or breathing pattern. Has anyone tried direct visual observation before? Jake asked. Of course not, Dr. Kellen replied sharply. That would be incredibly dangerous. All previous observations have been conducted through remote sensors from a safe distance. How far away were the researchers when they died? The closest was approximately 50 meters from the creature when it attacked, Zexthury said. The energy blast reached through the containment barrier and vaporized him instantly. Jake studied the setup more carefully. The containment system was indeed impressive, with multiple layers of energy shields and physical barriers. But he noticed something that troubled him. This looks more like a prison than a research facility, he said quietly. It is designed to keep the creature contained while allowing for safe observation, Zex-3 explained. Every precaution has been taken. But has anyone considered that the creature might feel threatened by all these barriers and weapons? Jake asked. If I were trapped in a cage surrounded by beings I couldn't communicate with, I might attack them too. The alien researchers exchanged glances that suggested they thought Jake was already proving their point about human recklessness. Mr. Martinez, Dr. Kellen said patiently, this creature has killed 17 people. It is not some misunderstood pet. It is a lethal threat that must be contained. Jake did not argue, but he also did not agree. He spent the next several hours reviewing all the recorded data from previous encounters. The video footage showed each researcher maintaining maximum distance while using remote probes and sensors to gather information. Every attempt at communication had been conducted through speakers and transmitters placed far from the creature. The pattern was always the same. The researcher would send some kind of signal or message toward the creature. Subject Omega would respond with increasingly agitated energy bursts. Eventually, the creature would generate a massive energy blast that somehow penetrated the containment systems and killed whoever was closest. But Jake noticed something the other researchers had missed. In every recording, just before the fatal energy blast, the creature's patterns would change to what looked almost like distress signals. The colors would shift rapidly between red and white, and the internal lighting would pulse frantically. I want to try a different approach, Jake announced. What kind of approach? Zex-3 asked nervously. I want to go down to the chamber level and simply sit near the containment barrier. No equipment, no communication attempts, no probes or sensors. Just observation. The room fell silent. Dr. Kellen was the first to speak. That is suicide. You would be within range of its energy attacks. Maybe, Jake said. But I want to see how it reacts to a passive observer rather than someone trying to poke and prod it with instruments. After much debate and several emergency consultations with higher authorities, Jake was finally given permission to try his approach. Multiple medical teams stood by, and every possible safety precaution was activated. Emergency transportation was ready to evacuate Jake's remains if necessary. Jake took the elevator down to the chamber level. The observation deck here was much closer to Subject Omega, separated only by the energy barriers and a narrow walkway. He could feel the power radiating from the creature even through all the shielding. He found a spot directly in front of the creature and sat down on the floor. The action immediately caused alarm in the monitoring station above. Mr. Martinez, what are you doing? Zex-3's voice came through his communicator. Sitting, Jake replied simply. This is not the time for human humor. Please explain your intentions. I'm going to sit here and watch. No instruments, no communication attempts, no sudden movements. I want to see what happens when someone just pays attention to it without trying to control or analyze it. The creature had noticed Jake's presence immediately. Its energy patterns had shifted to the familiar red and white colors that usually preceded an attack, but Jake made no aggressive moves. He simply sat cross-legged on the floor and watched. Hours passed. The creature's energy patterns gradually shifted from the aggressive reds to more neutral blues and purples. Jake noticed that when he moved slightly, the creature's patterns would change in response. When he stayed perfectly still, the patterns became more regular and rhythmic. Fascinating, he heard Dr. Zex-3 whisper through the communicator. The energy readings are more stable than we have ever recorded. Jake began to experiment with small movements. When he raised his hand slowly, the creature's internal light would brighten. When he lowered it, the light would dim. The responses were consistent and seemed intentional. It's watching me, Jake said quietly. It's responding to what I do. That is impossible, Dr. Kellen's voice crackled through the speaker. It has no visible sensory organs. Maybe it doesn't need them. Maybe the whole crystal structure is one big sensory organ. Jake continued his patient observation for the rest of the day. The creature's behavior became increasingly calm and predictable. The random energy burst stopped completely, and the color patterns became more complex and varied. On his second day, Jake tried something new. He began talking to the creature, not through any communication device, but simply speaking aloud in a normal conversational tone. "Hello there," he said. "I'm Jake. I'm here to try to understand you. I know you've had some bad experiences with my colleagues, but I'd like to be friends if possible." The creature's response was immediate and dramatic. Its entire structure lit up with brilliant white light, and the energy patterns became incredibly complex. But instead of the aggressive reds that preceded attacks, the colors were predominantly blue and gold. The energy output just increased by 300%, Zx3 reported with obvious concern. "Mr. Martinez, please move away from the barrier." "No," Jake said firmly. "Look at the pattern readings. This isn't aggression. This is excitement. It's trying to respond to me." Jake was right. The energy patterns were completely different from anything they had recorded before. They were complex, rhythmic, and seemed almost like language. The creature was not preparing to attack. It was trying to communicate. Jake spent his third day trying to understand the creature's light patterns. He had noticed that certain colors appeared when he spoke, different colors when he moved, and still different patterns when he remained completely still. There was definitely a system to it, but cracking the code would take time and patience. He started simple, pointing to himself and saying, "Jake," repeatedly. Each time he did this, the creature would pulse with the same sequence of blue and white lights. After an hour of repetition, Jake was convinced the creature was learning to associate his name with that specific pattern. Dr. Zx3 watched from the observation deck with growing amazement. The creature had been completely calm for 3 days straight, something that had never happened before. No aggressive energy bursts, no violent color changes, just steady communication attempts. "The linguistic analysis computer is detecting patterns in the light sequences," Dr. Kellen reported. "It appears to be some form of structured language. Can we translate it?" Zx3 asked. "Not yet, but Mr. Martinez seems to be building a basic vocabulary through repetition and context." Jake had moved on to more complex concepts. He would point to the walls and say "barrier," while the creature responded with sharp red flashes. When he pointed to himself and made peaceful gestures, the creature would glow with soft golden light. When he pointed up toward the observation deck where the other researchers stood, the creature's patterns became more agitated with quick orange pulses. "It doesn't like you watching," Jake said into his communicator. "The patterns change whenever I acknowledge your presence up there?" "Perhaps we should leave you alone with it," Zx3 suggested. "No, stay. I think it's just wary of groups. It's been hurt by groups before." Jake was beginning to piece together what might have happened on the mining colony. The creature had been in some kind of chamber with crystal formations when the miners broke through. It had probably been there for a very long time, possibly protecting or maintaining those formations for reasons the miners couldn't understand. "Can you show me the original survey data from Kepler 442b?" Jake asked. "I want to see exactly what the mining team found before the creature attacked." The data appeared on a portable display that Jake could access without leaving his position. The images showed the underground chamber where they had first encountered Subject Omega. The crystal formations were beautiful and clearly artificial, arranged in complex geometric patterns that suggested high intelligence and artistic ability. "These aren't random crystal growths," Jake said as he studied the images. "They're structures. Maybe buildings or monuments or art installations." When Jake showed the images to the creature by holding up the display, the response was immediate and powerful. The entire crystalline body blazed with brilliant white light, and the energy patterns became incredibly complex and rapid. But most importantly, the colors were predominantly blue and gold rather than the aggressive reds they had seen before. "It recognizes these structures," Jake said excitedly. "This isn't just its home. These formations mean something important to it." Over the next several hours, Jake used the images to build a more sophisticated communication system. When he pointed to the crystal formations in the pictures, Subject Omega would respond with specific light patterns. When he pointed to the mining equipment in the background, the patterns would shift to angry reds and sharp pulses. Gradually, a story began to emerge. The creature had been protecting those crystal formations, not just living among them. When the miners broke through with their drilling equipment and started extracting materials from the chamber, the creature saw it as an attack on something sacred. "I think those formations were built by its species," Jake explained to the research team, "and I think our mining operations were destroying them." "That would explain the violent response," Dr. X3 acknowledged. "But why didn't it try to communicate its concerns instead of immediately attacking?" Jake looked up at the observation deck where the alien researchers stood behind their protective barriers and monitoring equipment. "Look at this from its perspective," he said. "Strange beings with incomprehensible technology break into your sacred space and start destroying everything you're trying to protect. Then, when you try to stop them, more strangers arrive with weapons and cages and start treating you like a dangerous animal. Would you trust them enough to try talking?" The researchers fell silent as they considered Jake's words. From the creature's point of view, every interaction with other species had been hostile or threatening. Jake spent the rest of the week developing a more complex communication system. He used simple drawings, mathematical concepts, and even music to establish common reference points. The creature was remarkably intelligent and learned new concepts quickly. The breakthrough came when Jake drew a simple picture of himself sitting peacefully next to a representation of the creature. Subject Omega responded with the most complex light pattern, yet a beautiful cascade of colors that seemed to convey multiple meanings at once. "I wish I could understand what that meant," Jake said softly, to his surprise. The creature seemed to understand his frustration. It began repeating simpler versions of the same pattern, breaking it down into smaller components that Jake could analyze separately. "It's teaching me," Jake realized. "It's trying to help me understand its language." Working together, they gradually built a basic translation system. Jake learned that the creature's rapid red flashes meant danger or fear, while steady blue pulses indicated curiosity or interest. Gold patterns seemed to represent positive emotions, and the complex multicolored cascades were used for more sophisticated concepts. The most important discovery came on Jake's 8th day with the creature. He had been trying to understand what the crystal formations meant to it, using every communication method they had developed. Finally, Subject Omega generated a new pattern unlike anything Jake had seen before. The creature's entire body became transparent, and inside Jake could see what looked like holographic images. Scenes of other crystalline beings moving through vast crystal cities, their bodies singing with harmonic frequencies that created beautiful music. He saw forests of living crystal trees and oceans that sparkled with bioluminescent crystal formations. "My God," Jake whispered, "you're showing me your people." The images continued, showing the crystal beings working together to build magnificent structures, creating art and music and technology beyond anything Jake could imagine. But then the visions changed, showing cosmic disasters, dying stars, and the gradual extinction of the crystal civilization. Subject Omega was the last of its kind. And those formations on Kepler 442b were not just structures, they were memorials to its extinct species, carefully maintained across millennia by a being who refused to let his people be forgotten. "You've been alone all this time," Jake said, his voice filled with compassion. "You've been guarding their memory." The creature's response was a sound Jake had never heard before. It was like crystal chimes and whale song combined, hauntingly beautiful and infinitely sad. Through their communication system, Jake understood it was trying to express a concept that had no direct translation. The loneliness of being the last living memory of an entire civilization. For the first time since beginning his observation, Jake felt tears running down his cheeks. This magnificent being had spent countless years protecting the only remaining traces of its people, and the mining operations had been inadvertently destroying them. Jake wiped the tears from his eyes and looked up at the magnificent crystalline being before him. Now that he understood the creature's story, everything made perfect sense. Subject Omega was not a monster or a threat. It was a guardian, a keeper of memories, the last living connection to an entire lost civilization. "I understand now," Jake said softly. You weren't attacking the miners because you're violent. You were protecting something precious. The creature's light patterns shifted to deep blues and purples. What Jake had learned meant sadness and acknowledgement. Through their developing communication system, Subject Omega began to share more details about what had happened on Kepler-442b. The mining team had broken into what the creature considered a sacred memorial chamber. The crystal formations there were not natural minerals but carefully crafted monuments containing the preserved memories and histories of its people. Each crystal structure held thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, art, music, and cultural heritage. When the miners started extracting what they saw as valuable crystals, they were unknowingly destroying irreplaceable artifacts. Subject Omega had tried to stop them, but its attempts at communication were interpreted as attacks. The electromagnetic pulses it used to try to get their attention was seen as weapons rather than desperate attempts to make them understand. You were trying to tell them to stop, Jake said, but they couldn't understand what you were saying. The creature responded with golden light patterns that Jake was beginning to recognize as agreement or confirmation. Then it generated a new sequence that Jake had never seen before, one that seemed to carry deep emotional weight. Jake spent several hours trying to decode this new pattern. It was more complex than anything the creature had shown him before, involving multiple colors and intricate sequences that seemed to layer meaning upon meaning. Finally, he thought he understood the basic concept, but he wanted to be sure. Are you trying to thank me? He asked. The creature's entire body erupted in brilliant light, pulsing with rapid sequences of blue, gold, and white. But then it did something that shocked Jake completely. It began to generate sound waves that his translation equipment could actually process into recognizable language. The voice that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything Jake had ever heard. It was like crystal chimes mixed with whale song, beautiful and haunting and somehow ancient beyond measure. Much gratitude, small warm one, the voice said in carefully pronounced words. Jake sat in stunned silence. The creature had been learning human language from listening to his conversations, and now it could speak directly to him. The phrase it had chosen was simple but profound in its implications. You can talk, Jake whispered in amazement. Learning your word sounds, the creature replied, its crystal form shimmering with what Jake now recognized as excitement. Difficult to make proper vibrations, much practice needed. The impact of this moment was not lost on the research team. Watching from above, Dr. X3 was frantically recording everything while Dr. Kellen stood in shocked silence. No species in the Galactic Consortium had ever received direct verbal communication from Subject Omega. This is unprecedented, X3 said into his recording device. The creature is demonstrating linguistic adaptation capabilities that exceed our most optimistic projections. Jake ignored the commentary from above and focused on his conversation with the being he was beginning to think of as a friend rather than a research subject. What should I call you? Jake asked. Subject Omega. Doesn't seem right anymore? The creature was quiet for several minutes, its light patterns shifting through complex sequences. Finally, it spoke again. Old name cannot be made with your sound making. In your words, closest meaning is... The creature paused, searching for the right translation. Last light of the singing crystals. That's beautiful, Jake said. Can I call you Last Light for short? Acceptable, Last Light replied, its crystal form glowing with warm golden light. Jake friend shows much kindness to broken old guardian. The word friend hit Jake harder than he expected. This ancient being, alone for millennia, had just called him friend. It was a privilege and responsibility that Jake felt deeply. You're not broken, Jake said firmly. You've been doing something incredibly important. Keeping the memory of your people alive is one of the most noble things anyone could do. Last Light's response was a complex harmony of light and sound that conveyed emotions too deep for simple translation. Jake understood that no one had acknowledged the creature's purpose or shown appreciation for its dedication before. All previous contact had focused on containing or studying it as a threat. The small warm ones who came before, Last Light said carefully, They brought fear makers and cage builders. Could not understand purpose of guardian, thought last light was danger bringer. They were scared, Jake explained. When people are scared, they sometimes make bad choices. They didn't understand that you were protecting something important. Friend understands. Jake Friend sits with patience and shows no fear-making. Jake Friend listens to old stories and sees true. Purpose. Last light paused, then added with obvious emotion, much gratitude for seeing worth in Last Guardian. The phrase much gratitude was clearly important to Last Light. Jake was beginning to understand that it represented something more profound than simple thanks. In the creature's culture, expressing gratitude seemed to be a sacred act, reserved for moments of deep significance. Jake spent the next several hours learning more about Last Light's people and their lost civilization. The creature shared holographic memories of cities that sang with harmonic frequencies, art forms that combined light and sound and crystal growth patterns, and technologies that worked in harmony with natural forces rather than trying to dominate them. Your people were amazing, Jake said as he watched the beautiful visions. Their achievements should be remembered and honored. Memorial crystals on Mining World hold much knowledge, Last Light explained sadly. But fear makers and cage builders wish to destroy for mineral extraction. Last traces of singing crystal people will be lost. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. The mining operations were still active on Kepler 442b, slowly destroying irreplaceable cultural artifacts. The consortium saw them as valuable mineral deposits, not as the last remaining legacy of an extinct civilization. We have to stop them, Jake said. We have to make them understand what those crystals really are. Impossible task, Last Light replied with dim, tired light patterns. Small warm ones in fear cannot hear truth. We'll continue destruction until nothing remains. Not all of us are like that, Jake insisted. Some of us can learn. Some of us can change our minds when we understand the truth. Last Light studied Jake with what he had learned to recognize as curious attention. The creature was beginning to understand that humans might be different from the other species it had encountered. Jake Friend believes change is possible? Last Light asked. I believe understanding is possible, Jake replied, and understanding leads to change. That's why I'm here talking with you instead of studying you from a distance like the others did. Last Light was quiet for a long time, its crystal form cycling through subtle color patterns that Jake recognized as deep thought. Finally, it spoke again. Much gratitude for hope-bringing, Jake Friend. Perhaps small warm ones can learn to see beyond fear-making. Those words carried more weight than Jake initially realized. Last Light was not just thanking him for hope. The creature was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, its long vigil guarding the memories of its people might not be in vain after all. Jake knew he had to act quickly to save the memorial crystals on Kepler 442b. Every day that passed meant more irreplaceable artifacts were being destroyed by mining operations that had no idea what they were really extracting. He spent hours with Last Light learning everything he could about the crystal formations and their cultural significance. The memory crystals contain more than stories, Last Light explained, its form glowing with soft blue light as it shared knowledge. They hold the accumulated wisdom of 1,000,000 cycles, including technologies that could benefit all small warm ones. What kind of technologies? Jake asked. Last Light generated a holographic display showing crystal structures that seemed to grow and reshape themselves. Energy storage without loss, communication across vast distances without delay, healing techniques that work with life force rather than against it. Jake realized this information could revolutionize everything the Galactic Consortium knew about science and medicine. But first, he had to convince the Council to stop treating Last Light as a dangerous specimen and start seeing it as a potential ally. I need to present your case to the Consortium Council, Jake told Last Light. But they're going to be skeptical. They've seen you as a threat for so long that changing their minds won't be easy. Jake Friend wishes to speak for Last Light to the Judgment Makers? The creature asked, its light patterns showing surprise and curiosity. Yes, but I'll need your help. Can you create recordings or demonstrations that show your people's culture and knowledge? Something that proves the memorial crystals are more than just valuable minerals? Last Light considered this request carefully. Sharing the sacred memories of its people with aliens had never been done before, but the alternative was watching those memories be destroyed forever. We'll risk sacred trust for possibility of preservation, Last Light decided. But judgment makers must promise to treat memory crystals with proper reverence. Jake spent the next 2 days working with Last Light to prepare a presentation that would convince the council. The creature created beautiful holographic records of its civilization, showing their art, science, and philosophy. The displays were breathtaking, revealing a culture that had achieved harmony between technology and nature in ways no other species had ever managed. Dr. Zx3 was amazed by what he saw. These recordings show scientific principles that are centuries ahead of our current understanding. If even a fraction of this knowledge could be recovered from the memorial crystals, it would advance every field of research. That's exactly what I plan to tell the council, Jake said. But I need official support from the research team. Will you back my proposal? Zx3 looked nervous. The council has very fixed ideas about Subject Omega. They see it as a contained threat, not a potential partner. Suggesting that we treat it as an equal will be seen as extremely radical. Then we need to be radical, Jake replied. Because the alternative is destroying something that can never be replaced. Dr. Kellen had been unusually quiet during the preparations. Finally, she spoke up with obvious reluctance. I must admit that my initial assessment was incorrect, she said. The creature has shown no aggressive behavior since Mr. Martinez began his observations. Perhaps our containment protocols have been unnecessarily hostile. Getting support from Kellen was a major victory. Her species, the Veltari, were highly respected for their logical analysis and telepathic insights. If she was willing to reconsider her position, it might influence other council members. The presentation was scheduled for the following week. Jake spent every available moment with Last Light, refining their arguments and preparing for difficult questions. The creature was nervous about the outcome, expressing its concerns through rapid color shifts and agitated light patterns. What if judgment makers refuse to listen? Last Light asked. What if they choose destruction over preservation? Then we keep trying, Jake said firmly. Sometimes change takes time, but that doesn't mean we give up. The day of the presentation arrived, and Jake found himself facing the full Galactic Consortium Council. Representatives from 12 different species sat in judgment, their faces showing varying degrees of skepticism and concern. Jake had never spoken to such an important audience before, but he knew this might be his only chance to save Last Light and its people's legacy. Honored council members, Jake began, I'm here to present evidence that will fundamentally change how we view Subject Omega and the situation on Kepler 442b. He started with the basic facts, explaining how Last Light had been misunderstood and how the mining operations were destroying irreplaceable cultural artifacts. Then he showed the holographic records that Last Light had shared, demonstrating the advanced civilization that had created the memorial crystals. The council watched in stunned silence as beautiful cities of living crystal appeared before them, showing technologies and art forms beyond anything they had seen before. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. This being is not a threat, Jake concluded. It's a guardian, protecting the last remnants of one of the most advanced civilizations in galactic history. Instead of treating it as a prisoner, we should be honored that it's willing to share this knowledge with us. The questions that followed were intense and sometimes hostile. Several council members expressed concerns about security and the precedent of negotiating with previously contained subjects. Others worried about the economic impact of halting mining operations on Kepler-442b. Counselor Vexmuth of the Kron spoke first. These recordings are impressive, but how do we know this creature won't become violent again if we reduce containment protocols? Because violence was never its goal, Jake replied. Every attack when it felt its sacred sites were being threatened. Remove the threat, and there's no reason for violence. Counselor Thera of the Zephyrians raised another concern. The mining rights on Kepler 442b are worth billions of credits? You're asking us to abandon a major economic resource based on the word of a single creature. I'm asking you to choose irreplaceable cultural heritage over replaceable minerals, Jake said. The knowledge contained in those memorial crystals could advance our understanding of science and technology by centuries. That's worth more than any amount of raw materials. The debate continued for hours. Jake presented every argument he could think of, supported by data from Last Light's recordings and testimony from the research team. Slowly, he began to see minds changing as council members realized the true significance of what they were dealing with. The breakthrough came when Councilor Zindara of the Veltari announced her support for Jake's proposal. As Kellen's superior and one of the most respected telepathic analysts in the consortium, her opinion carried enormous weight. The evidence is clear, Zindara stated. We have been operating under false assumptions about this being's nature and intentions. The logical course of action is to halt the mining operations and establish proper diplomatic relations. One by one, other council members began to voice their agreement. The vote was close, but Jake's proposal passed by a narrow margin. Mining. Operations on Kepler 442b would be suspended immediately, and Last Light would be granted status as a cultural liaison rather than a contained subject. Jake felt tears of relief running down his face as he realized they had actually succeeded. Last Light's sacred memorial sites would be preserved, and the creature would finally be treated with the respect and dignity it deserved. When he returned to tell Last Light the news, the creature's response was the most beautiful display of light and sound Jake had ever witnessed. The entire chamber filled with harmonic frequencies that seemed to celebrate not just victory, but the possibility of understanding between different forms of life. 6 months later, Jake stood on the surface of Kepler 442b watching Last Light work on something that would have been impossible to imagine when they first met. The ancient creature was carefully constructing a new crystal formation, but this one was different from the memorial structures of its extinct people. This was a bridge between civilizations, designed to help other species understand and appreciate the knowledge contained in the sacred crystals. The mining equipment was gone, replaced by research stations and cultural preservation facilities. The underground chamber where Last Light's people had built their memorial was now a protected site, carefully maintained and studied by teams of respectful researchers from across the galaxy. The harmony crystals are responding well to the new growth patterns, Last Light said, its voice now clear and confident through the translation system they had developed. Soon they will be ready to share the healing technologies with your medical researchers. Jake smiled as he watched the crystalline structures slowly taking shape. Last Light had agreed to share specific technologies that could help other species, but only after establishing strict protocols to ensure the knowledge would be used responsibly. The creature had seen too much destruction to trust easily, but Jake's patient approach had shown it that some beings could be trusted with sacred knowledge. Dr. Zex3 approached from the research station, his 4 eyes bright with excitement. The preliminary analysis of the medical crystals is extraordinary. They seem to enhance natural healing processes without any negative side effects. This could revolutionize treatment for dozens of conditions across multiple species. Last Lights. People understood that technology should work with life, not against it, Jake explained. Everything they created was designed to enhance and support natural processes rather than replace them. The transformation in how the consortium viewed Last Light had been remarkable. What started as a dangerous specimen had become one of the most valued cultural liaisons in galactic history. Requests for consultation came from research teams throughout known space, all wanting to learn from the ancient being's vast knowledge and experience, but the most significant change was in Last Light itself. The creature was no longer the lonely guardian of a dead civilization. It had found a new purpose as a teacher and bridge builder, helping younger species understand concepts that had taken its people millions of years to develop. Jake, friend, Last Light said, approaching with the graceful gliding motion that had once terrified researchers. The council speakers wished to discuss new assignment for human bridge building methods. Jake raised an eyebrow. What kind of assignment? Another misunderstood being in distant system. Other species call it dangerous and impossible to communicate with. Sound familiar to Jake, friend? Jake laughed. It did sound very familiar. Since his success with Last Light, the consortium had started sending him to deal with other impossible first contact situations. His methods were still considered unconventional and risky, but the results spoke for themselves. What do we know about this new situation? Jake asked. Energy-based life form in the Vega system. Appears as pure light, moves through space without ships. Has destroyed 3 research vessels that attempted to study it. Last Light's crystal form shimmered with what Jake now recognized as amusement. Other species believe it is aggressive predator. Jake friend probably has different theory. I'm guessing it's trying to communicate and getting frustrated when nobody understands, Jake said. Just like someone else I know. Exactly like someone else you know, Last Light agreed. Council speakers request Jake friend investigate with usual patience and wisdom. The request was both an honor and a responsibility. Jake had become the consortium specialist in dealing with seemingly hostile alien intelligence, but each case was unique and dangerous. Still, he had learned that most monsters were just misunderstood beings who needed someone willing to listen. Will you come with me? Jake asked Last Light. Your experience with being misunderstood might be helpful. Would be honored to assist. Jake friend in new bridge-building cask, Last Light replied, its entire form glowing with warm golden light. Together we can show other species that patience and understanding work better than fear and cages. Dr. Zexthery joined their conversation, carrying a datapad with preliminary reports about the Vega situation. The ship is ready for departure whenever you are. I've compiled all available information about the energy being, though I must warn you it's even less comprehensible than Last Light was initially. That just means we have more to learn, Jake said confidently. Every intelligence has its own logic, even if it doesn't make sense to us at first. As they prepared to leave for the new assignment, Jake took one last look at the crystal garden that Light had built on Kepler 442, the memorial structures of the extinct civilization, stood alongside new formations that represented hope and cooperation between species. It was a beautiful symbol of what could be achieved when fear was replaced with understanding. Jake friend changed everything, Last Light said, following his gaze. Before you came, Last Light believed it would die alone, watching the memories of its people fade into nothing. Now there is purpose, friendship, and hope for preservation of important knowledge. You changed things too, Jake replied. You showed me that intelligence comes in forms we never imagined, and that the most important discoveries happen when we put aside our assumptions and really listen. The journey to their ship took them past several research teams who were carefully documenting the crystal formations. Jake was pleased to see representatives from multiple species working together, sharing knowledge and insights in ways that would have been impossible before Last Light taught them to see beyond their prejudices. Commander Lisa Hayes met them at the ship's boarding ramp. She had been skeptical of Jake's methods initially, but had become one of his strongest supporters after seeing the results. Ready for another impossible mission? She asked with a grin. They're only impossible until someone figures out the right approach, Jake said. Then they become obvious. As their ship lifted off from Kepler 442b, Jake looked down at the crystal gardens one more time. Each formation told a story of cooperation between different forms of life. Proof that understanding was possible even across the vast differences between species. Last Light settled into a specially designed chamber that could accommodate its crystalline form during space travel. Through the ship's communication system, it shared a final thought about their upcoming mission. Much gratitude, Jake friend, for showing that loneliness can end and purpose can be renewed. Now we go to offer same gift to another who may be lost and afraid. The phrase, much gratitude, still carried special meaning between them. It represented more than thanks, it was acknowledgement of the profound connection that could exist between different forms of consciousness when fear was replaced with compassion, Jake settled into his seat as the ship entered hyperspace, already thinking about the energy being they were going to meet. Somewhere in the Vega system, another misunderstood intelligence was waiting for someone patient enough to listen, and wise enough to see past the surface to the consciousness beneath, just like Last Light had been waiting for him.